Hey everybody, Edo here, and this is my first league video on Kickstarters. And to start it out, I think I'm going to be pretty high level on the whole Kickstarter thing, and then I can do subsequent videos that really dig into specific things you need to do and plan for, and really the nitty gritty. This is a little bit more like the so you want to make a game video I did with some higher level things to consider as you step into this idea of doing a Kickstarter, right? And so that's what you want to do, right? You want to do a Kickstarter. You've designed this game, and you want to take it to the market. And boy, Kickstarters and kickstarting is awesome. It is so awesome. It has allowed for such a wide range of games to be made. It is disruptive. I mean, there's a lot of negative things that come with that, right? There's a lot of, market. The market is super saturated and it's really hard and all this. There's this huge other half of volume that isn't good. But as far as an indie creator is concerned, being able to reach an audience, fund something, and bring it to market essentially on your own is just incredible. So, I'm a big fan of Kickstarters. I think that understanding Twitter and doing a Kickstarter is something that you should be taught in high school. I think it's just so fundamental to what life and product and social dynamics are going to be in the future. But so let's get started, right? Now, you're smart. You've come here because you're interested in some advice or perspective, and maybe that's not the case. But if you're not interested in advice and perspective, and you just want to go and do your Kickstarter and do it your way and just run, do it. Go for it, right? Some people do best just doing that, and some people do best learning on the fly and just reacting and dealing with the situation. That might be something you're really good at, and if so, go for it. But what I can say is Kickstarters are highly complex projects, or I don't know the right word for it, but you have the preparation, you have the outreach, you have the actual Kickstarter, you have fulfillment, you have a business. There's so many pieces to it that it is certainly worth getting advice. And there's fortunately tons and tons of advice out there, right? So here's the advice on advice. When you are looking at the websites and Jamie's or James, and I'll even link some of them that I like that were super useful to me below, and some communities and on Facebook and Reddit and all these great places to get information. As you're asking questions, engaging the community, right? You want to do that because Kickstarters are about that. As you're doing it, it's super important for you to think about who it is that's giving you the advice. What is their perspective? And then use that to think about it. This is true in life, right? Know why somebody's telling you something and what their background is when you're thinking about it. Don't just listen to what everyone says, especially since most people aren't agreeing, right? But I think there's a really simple way to break down advice when it comes to Kickstarter, right? Those who have done a Kickstarter before and those who haven't, right? Once you've done a Kickstarter, you recognize why I say that, right? It is such a different thing to see Kickstarters and talk about them than to actually be the person who has done it. It's like either there are people who are parents and have kids, and there are those who don't. And the advice is different and their perspective is different. No one's better than the other, or right or wrong, but boy, hearing about what it's like to raise a child from somebody who hasn't had a kid versus somebody who has had a kid, it's parents out there know what I'm talking about, right? So, now, to be a little bit more nuanced than that, on the have done a Kickstarter, right? You want to think about, did this person have a successful Kickstarter? How successful was it? And in particular, are they in a mega success category? Somebody who's had a Kickstarter that has made millions of dollars or had thousands and thousands and thousands of backers, right? They might have different advice than somebody who just barely made it or failed and tried again. And you do want to recognize that. And also, somebody might have done multiple Kickstarters, and some of the earlier ones were smaller and then they've had a really successful one, understand where they are in their business, in their career, just to think about what information makes sense to you. What risks might they be willing to take that would be utterly stupid for you to take, right? Like, there are people who can be riskier, whether they have a business, whether they have more self-finance than somebody else. And you, in terms of a Kickstarter, where you're taking on real liability, real responsibility, understanding those things are clear. Okay, did a Kickstarter. For those who haven't, there's probably more categories, but I generally think of 3, right? There are Kickstarter backers. There are people who pledge. There are the gamers, or if this is a board game Kickstarter, these are the people who arguably are the ones you want to and have check out your Kickstarter. And they fall into little categories: people who are casual backers, people who are like ardent. I've backed 200 games, right? So there's a field here. But theirs is a really important perspective. They really they know what they want, right? Like, so, well, let me say it differently. They think they know what they want, sometimes they don't, but they can provide the end user player perspective on what you're doing, and that's really important. But they don't understand what it's like to be to run a Kickstarter, and they might not understand the dynamics of the industry and the dynamics of what's happening with Kickstarter at any given moment, right? They may not know that there's a flood of party games on Kickstarter right now. They may only know they like this type of game, right? Next is the industry insider or reviewer or guy with a website who writes about Kickstarters. But these guys or gals might not have ever run a Kickstarter, right? So they probably understand what's happening on Kickstarter very well. They see lots of them. And so they have a really good perspective on what's happening in the market. But again, not necessarily what it means to be doing it, and not necessarily how their advice fits in with your dynamics. But almost more than backers or players, they're going to think their perspective is the right one and you're just making a mistake and do it their way. It's good information. Pay attention to it. Think it through, but recognize that this is from somebody who's informed, but not necessarily a backer and not necessarily somebody who's ran a Kickstarter. And find out. Just ask them, right? The last category I'll bring up is sort of what I'll call, and this might hit the middle one, is they all overlap, right? Is sort of the data miner or analysis, who is somebody that's really looking at Kickstarter from a statistical analysis, right? They're pulling the information, they're looking at the field, they're thinking about what day is the best day, and they're sort of ideally objectively presenting the results, saying, done this research, and here's what happened in 2015, here's what happened in 2016, here are the trends, here's some opinion maybe, right? Maybe they digested it a little bit and provided that forward. And there is a great amount of information there. Super important, super useful. It's always important that you have your own perspective on the data, right? Look at their analysis, but look at the data if that's the kind of thing you're paying attention to. Super important as well. Everyone is a statistic, and no one is, right? Statistics and averages and all that stuff gives you perspective, and everyone makes up that information. But on any given Sunday, right, on any given day, that may not apply to you at all whatsoever. You may be able to break that trend. You may do something different. You may not have all the information, and the cross-section of how everything hits doesn't relate to this category. Don't be off-put necessarily by the numbers. Be willing to do what you feel in your gut, but understand if it's against trend or if it's no longer sort of in line with what's going on, right? So that was a little bit long, but I really wanted to talk through some of that because I think it's so important. So you want to know who you're getting advice from. So before we go any further, let me give you a quick rundown on me and Kickstarter. So I've run 3 Kickstarters. The first one was Lift Off, Get Me Off This Planet. That was my most successful Kickstarter, at least from a funding goal perspective. I think we were going for 35 and we hit about 52 or something like that. It was $50,000 is a reasonable success on Kickstarter. It's not in the upper tier, but it is above sort of middling. And I think it was pretty well received from that, who's this guy out of the blue doing this Kickstarter group, which might represent you, right? So that was a pretty good out of the gate thing. But again, didn't set the world on fire. It did well and it was successful. And I think it had a lot of things that aligned itself well to Kickstarters. It had a lot of components. It had this really great meeples, the alien meeples we did, but set that aside. Then I did the Siblings Trouble on Kickstarter. That was not quite as successful. That had also been part of Tabletop Deathmatch, and I was a part of that too. I think that funded 28, 29, man, I should remember this stuff. And it was probably a goal of 18 or 19. So funded well, not proportionally probably aligned to goal versus funding, but fewer people. Liftoff was probably 1,100. Sibling Troubles was probably 600 something. And but overall smaller. And then the last game I did, Gem Pack Cards, which was based on an iOS game I had made, with others of course, was the closest. I think the goal was 12 or 12.5, and we funded like 13 or 14. So that was the smallest. So I mean, you look at the trajectory, it's sort of going this way, though so did the size and the scale of the games. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. But, and this is important, none of those Kickstarters were profitable, right? None of those Kickstarters, some of those games, and hopefully Siblings Trouble and Gem Pack is true as well, made money with units after, right? But when you just take the money that came in to what it took to set up the manufacturing, print the units, get them to backers, do all of that stuff, it was, I didn't walk away from those Kickstarters with $5,000, $10,000 in my pocket or more, right? So keep that in mind, right? So I think I've done well with Kickstarters, but I haven't necessarily set the world on fire, right? Okay, so I think that's the perspective on me. So, so you want to make a game. That my last video, we talked about knowing who you are, what you're good at, and knowing what it is you want to, what's your objective with your game. Well, to go to Kickstarter, in essence, you're saying, well, my objective isn't to just not tell anybody about it, right? I'm actually trying to make it a product. Now, that might be just for your local friends. You might be trying to make a product, but also start a business. Sorry about that, but also start a business. But you're essentially saying it's now a product. And so if it's a product, you need to understand the market. You need to understand what you're thrusting this product into, especially on Kickstarter, especially with crowdfunding and all that stuff. So what does that mean? That means spend time on Kickstarter. Look at the games that are on Kickstarter. Follow them. See what you like. See what you don't like. Know the backgrounds of the people doing Kickstarters, right? Understand whether it's an IP and start having perspective on what's happening with price points, what's happening with shipping, look at it, think about it. Also, as you're setting up your Kickstarter and thinking about what you want it to look at and how your page is going to be laid out and all that stuff, other successful Kickstarters are great ways to do that. Just copy them. Not literally, not words, but when you look at a page and you're like, oh, I see how they presented their information, that's probably a decent way to present your information if it was a Kickstarter that was very clear and easy for you to absorb and think about. So, emulating and replicating another Kickstarter is a good way to get started. But again, super important, super important. Understand the diff between you and that Kickstarter creator and your game and their game. I was having this conversation, there'll be a couple of nuances in here, but I was having this conversation with a guy who's doing a Kickstarter, and he wanted to have a $30,000 goal and charge, I don't remember, like $20, $30 for his 2-deck card game, and, I was like, man, seems really expensive, both for the game, and why does your goal have to be so high? That's like a really high goal. And he pointed me, he's like, well, there's this other game that did it. Well, that other game had 4 decks of cards. It was a sequel, and they were cheaper than his was anyway by $5 or $10. And it's like, well, like, don't sort of point at a game. Really think about what that is, right? But so understanding that market and how you can replicate it is really important. So I think spending time on Kickstarter is a good way of doing it. Back projects. Do the $1 backing on as many projects as you can. It's good in terms of being involved in the community, but also to like see how Kickstarter campaigns are run, to see the updates, to watch the page, to understand stretch goals, right? That's a great way to do it. And back some, right? You should be on Kickstarter because you like Kickstarter, you believe in the products, you believe in the stuff, okay? So that's sort of the base there. And the thing that needs to resonate the most is when you're going out to look and learn, just know who you're listening to. Know that, pay attention to the difference between what they did and you did, and don't think it's just going to work the same way. It's really dangerous because running a Kickstarter in many ways gives you access to real life risk, right? Making a design on your own in your room is different than being liable for receiving $50,000 from a bunch of people who want their stuff, right? Okay, so to just breathe, are you ready, right? And not ready for your Kickstarter, not to have all your ducks in a row. That's a different video. But are you ready to be public and social? Because crowdfunding requires you to be public and social, and you need to sit and think about that. Are you ready to reach out to all your friends and family and try to get them to support your campaign? Are you ready to nag at people? Are you ready to be responsive? Are you ready to have a bunch of people being negative towards you in forums or online for whatever reason, and you just need to kill them with kindness, right? Best way to handle a troll, kill them with kindness, or her. But are you ready to have negative feedback, and are you ready to listen? And are you ready to be on Twitter and Facebook and Google Plus and in communities? Are you ready to go to trade shows and conventions and your local store and all those things you never have to deal with if you just want to make your game or send it to a publisher, right? To be made. So just think that through because it's really important, and your willingness to do that really allows for you to be successful. Liftoff, my first game, was all about, I was at a game night, then I started talking with Teal, who did Shadow Throne, and Teal talked to me about my page, and then he introduced me to Tiffany, who did game reviews, and then she introduced me to a bunch of people, and I was following up, and I started the SWAT team, which is a bunch of people who I just told what I was doing just to hear back from them. I mean, all that stuff takes effort, and you got to be ready to do it, okay? So the other thing is your game... Oh, and sorry, and one more thing when you're ready. And there are some checklists and things like that, but have you really thought through what it means to run a Kickstarter, what it means to manufacture your game? Like, walking through the costs are super important. You need to spend the time. You know, is your Kickstarter ready to launch? But just as a fundamental, you are never ready if you don't know what it's going to take to actually make your thing and get it to your backers. You are not ready if you do not have that information. There are other things you can fudge. Don't fudge that information. Figure it out. Walk from where you are to where you need to go. Think about taxes. Are you going to make a business? One simple recommendation is get another credit card, either on your own account or a new account, and start putting all the charges you do on the Kickstarter, or for the Kickstarter on that. That's super helpful. But that's a little minor thing. But really understand that. Then think about, is your game ready, right? Has it been play tested ever? Have you written the rules down? No one at Kickstarter is going to stop you from making a Kickstarter if your game isn't made or ready or real. But as a major recommendation, don't running a Kickstarter takes so much time and effort that you don't also want to be designing and finalizing a game at the same time, especially for your first Kickstarter. Maybe over time you'll be better, right? Maybe eventually you'll be in good shape to do that. But for the first one, the more you can sort of have the game done and ready and then be able to run your Kickstarter, the better. Also, there isn't a lot of margin in Kickstarters. There isn't a lot of Kickstarters today in board games are not there to pay for art development and design development and everything it took for the game to be ready. It really just pays for manufacturing and fulfillment. It's very difficult. It's not like an art Kickstarter where people are just paying to support you. Kickstarting board games has become more like I'm pre-ordering this game and I expect you to be able to deliver it and make it and all that stuff. So make sure you got everything sorted out in your game. Okay, so you're confident, you're ready, you've made sure and you're thinking about your game and it's ready. Okay, so 4 things to take forward with you. 1, get advice. But when you get advice, build and start having relationships with the community. Your audience is important and it's critical and it's something you need to grow over time. And in fact, you can do that by saying, hey, everybody, I want to make a Kickstarter. Hey, everybody, I love games. Hey, you don't have to have an IP and some gigantic audience to start with. Though if you do, that's fantastic. That's probably one of the most valuable things you can have is an audience you're bringing to your Kickstarter up front. If you don't, get on Twitter, get on Facebook, get on G+, community, ask people questions, follow up, connect, get advice from other creators and other backers. This is just the first stage of the kind of social behavior you need to do to become somebody who's going to run a Kickstarter, right? So it's fundamental to the platform and it's fundamental to the overall success and getting the help you'll need when you face challenges, right? Okay? So, community, get advice, connect with your audience and the community around your audience, right? This one's really easy. Don't launch until you're ready. It's fun. You feel like, not fun's not the right word, but you feel like you want to set a date, right? You feel like you want to say, I'm going to do it here. Or maybe you're running out of money or all these things. Very often backers are like, I have this date. And their dates are useful. You want to say, tell a reviewer, I want your review by this date, right? But the actual date you launch is less important than you being ready to launch and comfortable and having everything buttoned up. I mean, somebody was talking to me, I end up getting on the phone and giving lots of people advice. They were talking to me, they said, hey, we want to know if we should maybe run a Kickstarter. And we're talking about it, and they're like, well, we were thinking like in 2 weeks. And it's like, how could you possibly be asking me that question and say 2 weeks? In your head, minimum I would say is buffer 3 months of prep. Once you know what you're doing and are ready and your game is ready and lining everything up. But lots of people now, bigger campaigns, there are people working on it for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months, 10 months, a year. It's a major ordeal and you want to be prepared. And just so simply, everything's lined up, but your review videos didn't come through, but you set the date. Just punt. You may have spent on advertisement. There are a couple places that make that a little bit more difficult, and you need to figure that out. But short of having a legitimate, I'm going to lose $4,000 if I'm not at this event type of thing, when you're ready. Sort of in line with my last video, play to your strengths, right? Think about what you're good at, what's good about your game, and push that. If it's really funny and creative and hilarious, do a bunch of funny, creative, hilarious posts, right? If the game is or you are really good at being responsive and communicating and being on Facebook and being social, do that stuff. If you're not good at anything like that and you just have the most incredible design but are weak at those other things, either find somebody else or focus on the design and write a bunch of designer blogs or designer videos or whatever. Learn and figure out what the strength of your project is and try to amplify that. Try to get that through And especially for a first Kickstarter, be you. Understand those strengths and weaknesses, understand your game, and communicate that. There still is that place on Kickstarter where people are actually there to support other people, and I really believe in that. So don't run away from that, and believe in yourself and what you're doing, right? Despite what advice might be or the statistics might be, right? And along those lines, just on this whole advice thing, there are no rules, right? There's no only, this is the only way you can be successful. This is always, never, all that stuff, when you look at it, isn't true. There are people who are successful this way, people who are successful that way. It's a hit-driven business. These are creative projects, right? Just don't feel like you can't do it your way. Don't feel like you can't make the decisions that are best to you. You have to make the decisions that are best to you, right? You have to think about it through your lens and translate all the inbound information. But what I can say is, while there are no rules, be organized, keep good notes, keep your information clear, know what you're doing, like just be organized. This is so many moving parts. Be organized, be responsive. Probably the most valuable thing in a crowdfunding, Kickstarter, this kind of initiative is people say something and you respond and you're responsive. Like that is so valuable. Organized, responsible, and agile, right? Be able to change, be able to listen to a great idea. Liftoff was filled with so many things where somebody was like, hey, you should do a stop motion video to start off your Kickstarter. That was Aldo. And I was like, are you kidding me? I've never done anything like that, but I thought about it. I was like, that'd be awesome. So I tried it, right? Like that's just one example, but there's tons. You just need to be able to look at what's happening, be responsive, make decisions. So you want to be, if you're playing soccer, you're on balls of your feet, be agile, be ready, right? And organized and responsive. Like, I think those things will take you through Kickstarter. Be with the community and your audience. Launch when you're ready, right? Play to your strengths. And there are no rules, but be organized, responsible, and agile if you can. The last thing, and this is one of those places where I talk about those who've done a Kickstarter and those who haven't. In most cases, unless you've got a big team of people doing things, which I don't think is true for a lot of the people who'd be interested in Kickstarter, running a Kickstarter is one of the hardest and loneliest things you're going to ever do in your life. It's hard to express, but it's this idea that you're trying to accomplish your dream. You're trying to make it happen. But there's a window of time. Like, you're like, most of the time dreams are things that sort of roll forward over time, but this is like, no, this is the shot. In 30 days, I either fund and everything I've been working hard on for the last year, 2 years, 10 years, whatever, becomes real, or it doesn't. And you can always try again, right? And as you don't fund in the first few minutes, which maybe you do and you're lovely and you're happy for life, but like assuming you're not in that 2%, you don't fund in the first 2 minutes, you are then in this grind of time against money, against audience, where you're just sort of watching and wondering what's going to happen and looking at the amount of money and the slump and getting depressed and then getting excited and depressed. It's a roller coaster of emotions, but it oftentimes you sort of, your family's not there. I mean, they're there, but it's a very personal thing. It's an amazingly personal thing. You could not. It is so personal, and it's hard, and it's emotional, and it's something you got to work through and live through. And it's that being so close, and I don't think oftentimes backers necessarily get that, or the data shows it, or somebody says, well, this is what you do and don't do in a Kickstarter. That emotional experience of running a Kickstarter is really powerful, and it's just something that you should be ready for. I'm on here talking to you because of everything that happened with the liftoff. That Kickstarter, in many ways, completely changed the trajectory of my life, both in terms of making a fantastic game liftoff and getting it out to backers and being really excited about that, but just my entire engagement with the community, these reviews and videos, other games, and it was really a dynamic shift. I think this is an incredible opportunity. I think this is something you should do, and you should go through the process of gathering all the information to be successful. Remember who you are and what you're trying to do. It's a journey. Don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. And go for it. Because this is an amazing time to be doing this sort of stuff. Anyway, thanks a lot.